Hello, and welcome to Clan Midgard's Storytime. We are reading 3 books today, the first of which is the Outersphere Warlords, The 300 Faces of Death. Then we will be reading the second in the series, 5,000 Degrees. Anyway, we are starting with the 300 Faces of Death. And to appease some of those that like to read a story while they're by the fire, we even have a fireplace. It's not a very good fireplace, and it's not animated. I didn't have time, but at some point. 300 Faces of Death. Outersphere Warlord Monologues, Book 1. There is a world out there where everything is fine, everything is good, everything is fair, and everything has its place. You must spend your life looking for that world. Hello, Wendy. That's not in the book. She just came in and said hi. This was the last thing that my granddad said to me before he died. I was 5 years old and didn't understand what he meant then. I spent years wandering, looking for something I didn't understand. Now here I am, looking death in its 300 faces, and I find myself smiling. I think I finally understand what that old bastard meant. He just never finished what he was saying before they shot him. He meant for me to find it and conquer it. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me explain. I must have been 17 years old, full of bravo, strength, and a complete lack of understanding of the universe around me. So I did what any other kid from my area did. I joined up with the Phalanx. Imagine the most useless, underfunded bunch of yahoos with little to no leadership and a total disregard for their own people's safety, and you wouldn't be far wrong. Just drop your expectations a little further. We were basically the grunts for the order. We would go in, wreck the place, and then go home after stealing everything that wasn't tied down. We gorged ourselves on blood, guts, and glory. Or rather, those that survived it. The others, well, they were the lucky ones. They got out dead, admittedly, but dead is better than what happened if you were good at your job. And I was very good at my job. Training in the Phalanx was brutal, quick, and dirty. Basically, they gave us live rounds, threw us in the desert in 2 teams, and the team that was left standing was hired. The others fed the buzzards until the next recruitment drive. I was on the side that won, obviously. I mean, this would be a really short retelling otherwise, right? Anyway, the time came when we were supposed to get our first shot at promotion. Basically a chance at a bigger chunk of loot at the end of a campaign. Me and 2 buddies got together and decided we knew how to play the system. We were going to get all 3 of us promoted. Then split the first 3 runs of loot between us. We thought we were smart. Unfortunately, every other shitface for 20 leagues had the same idea. When the trial came up, there were about 50 groups of 3, about 30 groups of 2, about 100 solo knuckle draggers. So there we were, me, Dreg, and Fishstick, ready to take on the world. Dreg was a 3-time loser, as in he'd survived 3 promotion runs, but Fishstick was fresh meat, like me. This is a very short story. It's the Outersphere Warlord Monologues. It's basically a guy who's facing death and he's retelling his life. The boss man sent me the message to each communicator that the challenge to be promoted was simple this year. It was a race. This wasn't a surprise since we'd been dropped off in a desert with 30 racers nearby. The only problem was that the racers were one-seaters. So a fight started out. All those people tearing into one another was a great sight to behold, especially as we just happened to have been standing looking at 3 beautiful-looking speed racers when the message dropped. We got about 120 leagues lead before the next group managed to get to theirs. Dreg had left a little surprise for them. They got on their bikes, and then, poof! They were a slimy residue on the next group back. That gave us another 50 leagues lead, while the subsequent groups checked their bikes for booby traps. Dreg was a bastard, but he had only put 1 on the 3 nearest, as he didn't have time to do the others, but knew every group afterwards would have to stop to check. What we didn't expect was that our lovely, shiny new racers were actually about the slowest bikes in the universe. We found that out when the last of the other groups came rushing past us with hoots of laughter and division, and depressingly about 6 of those racers had 4 or 5 people clinging onto them for dear life. One was being pushed by the remaining few guys who had managed to piece together what was left of the booby trap bikes, which was depressing to say the least. Suffice to say, we were fucked. This is when I decided that a shortcut was in order. This may seem like cheating, but the boss man never explicitly said we had to use the racers. He also never explicitly said not to rob the locals, or not to kill the locals, or not to hump a rock, but we took the last one as a given. Well, me and Dreg did. Fishstick may or may not have fornicated with a few boulders the night before. Anyway, I looked at the maps, looked for the nearest town, and we started out. Dreg reckoned we had about 2 hours before the first group would get to the halfway mark. If we had driven on, we wouldn't make the halfway mark for 6, so we were totally fucked if we didn't cheat. I mean, think outside of the box. Turns out the local town was full of very helpful people, totally willing to give us their jump ship in return for Fishstick leaving as quickly as he could and taking his really big gun with him. Well, all apart from the sheriff, who decided that holding on to his gun rather than his life was more important. Fishstick was called that because he was a crabby bastard, and also because he stank to high heaven. So the sheriff was dead, and Fishstick got his first and last taste of wanted warrants out on his head. Seems people don't take too kindly to phalanx tactics outside of the theatre of war. Come to think of it, most people didn't take too kindly to phalanx tactics, full stop. Anyway, Dreg told me to fly, as I had experience with things what fly, by which he meant I had made a land kite during some downtime. Don't ask, it's something I picked up when I was younger. Either way, things were going swimmingly. Turns out kite flying really does have similarities with flying a jump ship, in that the more air you get between jumps, the further you go before crashing to the ground. I have to say that I was really unfortunate that the authorities kept tabs on stolen jump ships on the backwater we'd been dropped off on, because the local police came armed for bear, especially once the red goo Fishstick had left behind was identified as the sheriff. Terrible happenstance, really. The sheriff turned out to be a local war hero, as well as a highly loved and decorated sheriff. So it turned out that I was really good at flying jump ships when the shit hits the fan. Also, turns out that jump ships are much harder to land than to fly. Suffice to say, we lost the police, but gained about 60 clotheslines, a chicken coop, and the remains of what must have been the woman hanging out her clothes on said clotheslines stuck to the window. Dreg, now covered in Fishstick vomit, decided that maybe I needed some lessons before he let me have access to the pilot's seat again. We ended up making it to the finish line about 10 minutes ahead of the nearest group, and had managed to cook some of the chicken still in their coop when we landed. Dreg then decided it would be a good time to turn on us, so I shot him. Then I decided that I didn't like fish stick anymore and collected the bounty on his head too. It was a great day, got promoted, got plasma cooked chicken, and got a payday on 2 bounties. Paid off my own, all in one foul swoop. Sorry, couldn't resist. Anyway, the higher-ups decided that I was definitely the right material for the job and asked me to please bring more chicken next time as well. Life was easy back then. Kill and loot, then repeat. I was very good at the killing and the looting. I was even better at the repeated killing and looting. I got very wealthy and very disliked by pretty much anyone dumb enough to cross my path. Well, at least till they were dead and being looted. I was what some might call a barbarian when it came to warfare. I seemed to have a knack of being in the right place at the right time to avoid being killed, but in the wrong place at the right time to catch the enemy off guard. I always prided myself on thinking outside of the box, and that I could shoot like a demon possessed by a bigger demon who could shoot really fucking well. I also spent a lot of time tinkering with my weapons and making them much more devastating and effective at the killing part. Turns out there really is no reason to have safeties on weapons used in war, or any reason not to include an explosive payload in every shot you fire, and even less reason to worry about war crimes if there are no witnesses. It was good times. That was before the Order decided that the reputation we had garnered wasn't worth the shock factor, as it was causing troubles back in the centre. They decided to give us our walking papers by sending us to the front. Basically, they wanted us to die horribly in a battle against the White Petal Corps, then claim a moral victory by sweeping in behind us and killing the remaining WPC troops off with ease. They didn't count on us actually winning, especially as they had failed to tell us that the guns they had given us were flat out of ammo, and the ammo dumps were all booby-trapped. Anyway, we decided that the White Petal Corps wouldn't booby-trap their own ammo dumps. Their own ammo dumps? Ammo dumps. I do apologise. This was right. They didn't. But they also didn't leave them totally undefended, as some of my less intelligent compatriots had theorised. You would be very surprised to hear that a lot of phalanx died getting replacement clips, and even more died trying to get out of the heavily fortified White Petal Corps ammo dump. So there was about half of us dead by the time we actually started really fighting back, or at least not just running around and screaming, I'm going to die, please God, I'm going to die. Which is what some of our troop decided was the safest course of action, or the few guys who stuck their heads literally in the sand and hoped that because they couldn't see the enemy, that the enemy couldn't see them. I was really looked up to in the phalanx. I could walk, talk, and chew gum at the same time. Most of my platoon couldn't work out which was the dangerous side of the gun, and a few couldn't work out that they were actually dead and continued fighting long after there wasn't really much left of them. The phalanx really were a special kind of force. Then things got really interesting for a while, what with the White Petals sending in their elite troops to try and kill us, the Order sending in their cleaners to try and kill us, and the Peacekeepers deciding that they would send in theirs to try and kill us. They didn't, in case you were thinking I was a ghost. Anyway, after about 6 weeks of fighting and about 5,000 dead elites, 4,500 dead cleaners and 2,500 dead peacekeepers, the peacekeepers had a bright idea. Instead of sending troops in to kill us and have them die horribly, they would hire what was left of us and use us as replacement peacekeepers. This is how I ended up working in law enforcement. It was a dark period of time for me. I made fuck all, Spent a lot of time frequenting donut shops. Did you know that the police eat donuts because they taste really nice? Anyway, this is also when I made most of my lifetime enemies too. You would think people would be more pissed off about the time I stole 400,000 credits and 3 old masters' paintings from a small religious conclave. But apparently, law enforcement makes a lot more enemies in a much shorter period of time, and you get less stuff for it. No wonder the peacekeepers were trying so desperately to get recruits. No one was dumb enough to work for them, except idealists and people with massive bounties on their heads that they could never in a million cycles pay off. Guess which I was. I certainly wasn't sold on their idea of peace to all nations, races and creeds. I didn't even know what a creed was when I first joined. One benefit with the peacekeepers was that you got free education and healthcare. It came in handy when I wanted the identifier chip removed from my spinal column after some bounty hunters came looking for me and found that my Lawkeeper pistol was still heavily modified and could in fact shoot through body armor and around corners and had explosive rounds and burned like the sun. Look, it took me at least a month to get the guts out of my uniform. The healthcare plan also came in handy after I got type 2 diabetes and had to have it cured with gene therapy. Another downside to law work. Those damn donuts were really good. Anyway, I paid a little extra to have some useful additions to my body and mind. Let's just say I really can see in the dark, jump really high, and have mildly bulletproof skin. Oh, and you can hear the sound of do-do-do-do-do-do-do when I run in slow motion. Not really, but it sounded cool. Let's also just say I don't have any loot left from my time in the phalanx either. Or a left arm. Or a left eye. Or leg. Though you could never tell from looking at me. Unless you looked at my robotic arm, eye, or leg. For your own future reference, please note that when you were jokingly shouting, "Random Granada!" and just chuck a grenade in a random direction, that you check to see if the random direction you are throwing it in doesn't happen to have 3 tons of ammo sitting there. Or that you accidentally kept a hold of the pin when you threw it. That's probably the most important part, really. Anyway, during this time I made a lot of contacts within law enforcement. Judges, magistrates, lawyers, union reps, internal affairs, more union reps, more internal affairs. This came in very useful from time to time after I had left and set up my own mercenary group. By the time I was 30, I had 20 guys working for me and had a reputation as a group that could do anything, anytime, anywhere, and for half of the cost of either of the main companies. We also came with better training and weapons too, mainly because we requisitioned a good chunk of them from the Peacekeeper vaults before leaving. I got to the point where even the White Petal Corp and Order started hiring us. At one point, both had hired us to take a town, and we kept taking and retaking the town from ourselves without so much as a bullet fired in either direction. The locals loved us for that. We would just soiree into the town centre and fly a different flag each day, while setting some riders on fire and filming the whole thing with some sound effects for good measure. We managed to keep that going for about 3 weeks till we got bored and just liberated the place for the locals as a thanks for all the free booze. We weren't a bad group, really. Most of us were veterans from the phalanx who had worked as peacekeepers after the front incident. The rest were tag-alongs we'd picked up from various hot points around the Outersphere systems. We looked after our own and always kept a contract. Even if we were fighting against ourselves and pretending it was a hard fight, we always lived up to the contract. That's where I started to really look at the situation in the Outersphere. Warring factions, centre politics, corporations being douchebags, and mercenary groups like mine making a killing. It was all too shitty for the locals, really, though very profitable. I think I first thought about it when I met my first love and wife, Helena. She was an awesome woman, She could carry 2 heavy machine guns and enough ammo to take on a small army all on her own. Big tits too. Though she had some strange ideas about foreplay. Let's just say it involved getting very friendly with weapons. She often came with a bang, if you get my meaning. She was a fighter for the local resistance cell that had hired us to oust the Order from their borders, which took us a day, I might add. Serves them right for stabbing us in the back. Well, anyway, we fucked like it was Liberation Day all over again. Ah, great times. She wanted to settle down with a farm after we got married, but I still wanted to sow my seeds, as it were. Still visit occasionally, dropping off any goodies I think I might help with the farm. It's a good place to keep your head down, if you ask me. Plus, she still fucks like a machine gun. Sometimes with a machine gun. We're still married too. I haven't actually gotten divorced from any of my wives yet. Seems like the sensible financial option since lawyers are the real criminals. Life for me started to get very complicated from that point onwards. We still took jobs from the various factions. I mean, we had to make ends meet, didn't we? But we always managed to somehow get the contracts done without fucking the local population over too much. Which is very hard when one of the contracts was to literally fuck the local population out of an area. No, not in that way, although we would have probably done that without being asked to if we'd have thought about it at the time. Turns out the Order got wind that there was a good mining location right under this small town's feet, and the locals didn't want to move. We ended up spending 6 weeks building and shipping each damned one of them off to a better location, while at the same time contaminating the ground underneath so that when the Order did get there, and they would come, that they would have to spend more decontaminating the area than they would actually make mining the ores. Or, at least, that was the plan. Turned out that the ores they wanted reacted with the contaminants and blew the whole place to kingdom come, along with the group of Order scientists that came to survey the area, and the daughter of the Order Prince, and about 60 visiting dignitaries from the centre, and about 500 troops who were protecting the delegates, and about 1,400 support staff. But thankfully, for our bank balance, they blamed the locals and then tried to rehire us to kill them all in retaliation. Meanwhile, the locals hired us to kill the Order troops. White Petals came in and tried to oust everyone, and we ended up being the most wanted mercenary group in Outersphere history, which is no mean feat, I might add. You wouldn't believe how many damn bribes it took to clean up that little hiccup, which, I might add, were wasted because of what happened shortly afterwards. Most of the guys started to get a little tired of the bullshit and wanted to turn straight raiders. They made a lot of sense. You take what you want, you kill who you want, and you don't answer to anyone. There is also a kind of honour in having a set of principles you stick to as well. I had to sit them all down and murder a few of them to change their minds. When I say a few, I mean there were 29 bodies and 29 bounties to collect by the end of the meeting. 36 to 7 is some serious downsizing. Me and the remainder of the group decided to go semi-resistance at this point. We were basically raiders, but we would only hit the Order, the White Petals, and centre forces. The occasional town, city, transports, research centres, breweries. We hit a lot of breweries, actually. Travelling circuses and farms. Basically, we killed anyone who wasn't known to us as friendly, or just plain known to us. That sorted the conflicting interests right out. But we never hit anyone who couldn't afford it, and we donated a lot of goods to schools and churches, apple pie factories, the local prostitutes, and pretty much every bar and den of inequity that happened to pop up. Strange how towns started welcoming us as heroes, considering what we were doing. I suppose it was all the business we brought in, and the taxmen we strung up. I grew to trust and rely on each of the remaining 6 of my little company. We became known as the Outersphere 7. There was me, and I'm telling you about me, so I don't need to say too much otherwise this would end up being an autobiography of a person telling an autobiography of a person telling an autobiography ad infinitum. And unless you're into Asimov, that gets very boring very fast. There really isn't much to say, really, other than I'm our fearless leader who is smart, cunning, intelligent, quick-witted, brainy, clever, bright, intellectual, totally not reading from a thesaurus at this point, sexy, and smart. Did I mention smart? Either way, I'm the boss of my own story, so I'm going to portray myself however the hell I like. If you don't like it, tough shit, you bought the stupid book anyway. And there's Sally, who's a real mean bitch with a knife fetish. Nothing more to say about her, really, as she would kill me for telling you about the times we totally didn't sleep together. We totally did, by the way. She's tall, looks like one of those ancient Norse goddesses, in that she's hot, not that she looks like a really old person with saggy boobs and wrinkled skin. She's also our pilot, and damn good at she is, but don't let her read this book or hear me say that, as she also has a serious ego problem. Most of the time it's well deserved. I mean, she does hold the fastest slingshot record for a black hole. She has killed more people with her tits than anyone else I know. And she can clip the wings off of a fly at 50 paces blindfolded, throwing a 10-pound knife backwards. But her shit does stink, contrary to her claims that it doesn't. And yes, it was her who caused the veneer shit slide of 22. Okay, I might have accidentally blocked the veneer silage tanks, and that may have caused a slight methane buildup, but the spark that set the whole explosion off was caused by her insistence to throwing her damned knives into every damn barrel around, even the red ones that are clearly not designed as targets for knife-throwing practice. Then there's Benny, who is a big dumb son of a bitch, but you could rely on him to side with you no matter what you said or did. Plus, he can lift anything, and I mean anything. He once lifted a Land Cruiser and flipped it. If you can imagine a tank covered in muscles that has done a lot of steroids, has no sense of danger, and is loyal to a fault, that's Benny. He also wears the same shirt all the time. Now, I'm not saying it's dirty or anything, but damn, man, even the food stains have food stains. He also eats about as much as he earns, and he earns about as much as he can carry. Trust me, he eats a lot. If he isn't working, eating, sleeping, or working out, he's probably eating, sleeping, and working out at the same time. But bless his dirty-ass, nasty shirt that's seen more dirt than a politician's seen bribes. He is loyal. Derv is our sniper, and he has never missed a single shot, but has also never smiled. Miserable bastard, but I always want him watching my back. He's about as skinny as Benny is large. I swear if he turns sideways, he disappears. He eats nothing but ramen noodles, of which he is mildly allergic, i.e., for your own safety, never go to the toilet after him. For someone who is such a good shot, you kind of wonder how he manages to miss the toilet bowl from half a foot away. He has waist-length hair that is almost as well kept as his guns. He also has zero sense of humour or ability for small talk. Getting stuck with him for an hour in a drop box while waiting for pickups is like spending a week in a sensory deprivation tank. I swear he actually sucks the life from those around him. He is, however, ungodly with a sniper rifle. There was an old joke in the Phalanx that he could bounce a shot off 24 surfaces through 6 walls at a distance of 25 clicks and still hit a target the size of his personality. I always maintained that that was impossible, as he doesn't have one. Then there's Callie, who is a short little powder keg of a girl. She's our heavy weapons expert, and by expert I mean she wouldn't let anyone else use the damn things except me after a lot of convincing and whine. She's also as short as Tally is tall, but equally as beautiful. She is like some oriental lotus leaf, quivering in the breeze, showering all those around her with the glowing light of her personality. She is also our computer tech wizard, and has hacked into my terminal and made it so that no matter what I say about her that's negative, it always comes out as a positive. Hence me thinking that she is a super nice, friendly, wonderful peach of a person who cares deeply for all those around her and makes everyone smile with her beautiful sense of fashion. I shall stop writing about her now, as she would change anything I said about her anyway. She's actually a really nice girl, but her sense of boundary leaves me wanting her company all the more. See what I mean? Oh, and she's my 9th wife as well. Then there was the twins, Violence and Violates. No, that isn't their names, but you would have an easier time sucking on a black hole than getting Darren and Sarah out of them. Violence, Darren, was exactly as advertised. He was a ball of hatred wrapped up in skilled, hand-to-hand, quick-shooting, violent tendencies who loves his double pistols more than he loves his own sister, which is a lot, by the way. Oh, and he has an awful moustache that he refuses to get rid of. He looks like some kind of 25th century dwarf porn star. Not that I know a lot about 25th century dwarf porn stars, but I assume they're about as good as 28th century dwarf porn stars. In that if you find yourself watching them, you really need to take a long look at your life choices. There isn't really a lot to say about Darren. He's short, like endearingly short, like unable to reach the top shelf at the local market kind of short. Like stands up to go down kind of short, if you get my drift. But he swears that he is average in height and that everyone else on board is just giantkin. He certainly is average for a dwarf. He dresses very snazzy though. His boots always have exceedingly tall heels in them, which serves to make him look even shorter than he is. But he complements these overly snake-skinned boots with a white tuxedo, so he kind of looks like the dwarf version of the classic movie from the 20th century, Saturday Night Illness. He even totes the same golden medallion around his overly hairy neck. There is a very good reason he has his own shower, and nobody ever tries to use it except the cat. And even the cat comes out choking on hairballs that are not his own. He's a nice guy, though, and best man at all of my weddings, although his sense of timing, he has no sense of timing whatsoever. He once ran down the aisle, panting and puffing, while madly waving the ring about, which would have been fine, except we'd finished the service 3 hours earlier. He's always late. It doesn't matter if it's getting up in the morning or heading up an important mission, he is always late. He takes longer in the bathroom than anyone anywhere. Like you wouldn't believe how long. He swears that it's because he's reading in there, but I swear that War and Peace takes less time to read backwards. 1 letter at a time, with your eyes closed. I love the guy. Him and Benny have always got your back. Even if one of them is a quarter the size of the other and probably can't see over his inordinately large hand cannons. Then Violates, aka Sarah in a previous life, or Viola if you're a close friend, so it's Violates to you, is our engineer, and damn good at it she is. She can pull an engine out of thin air, or your ass if you get too close, and has about 3 different assault class robots with her at all times. Yes, even in bed. It's very crowded in there. She is the second shortest and the second smallest of everyone here. But you wouldn't guess it by her voice. If you didn't see her, you would swear she was 13 foot tall, had a chest the size of the volcano on Ceres 3, and a mouth that was actually wired into the ship's weapon systems. You can literally hear her coming from a league away. It doesn't help that her robots also crunch and grind everywhere they go. I thought it was the reason that she was deaf that caused her to be as loud as she is. But now, after knowing her for years, and knowing how damn sensitive her hearing actually is, I think she does it just so that people don't ask her to keep fixing their computer terminals after sticking their fists through them because the most wonderful and beautiful Carly has been at them. I also learned the hard way that between her legs when she comes is like sitting on the edge of the jet raceway at Paloma Beach. The noise actually pierced my remaining eardrum. I have since learned my lesson, and now, if in that same situation, I wear industrial strength ear protection. Viola also has a soft spot for the ship's cat, Snarf, and keeps stealing him from my quarters and blaming the dodgy door locks that she apparently just cannot find the problem with. I keep suggesting that she simply have Snarf in her quarters and actually fix mine. But she is of the opinion that, no, that's your cat. You've had him for ages. And blah, 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 blah. What she means to say is that I just like stealing your stuff, boss. Which is why I never get any of my tops without booby stretch marks in them, even if I haven't worn them myself. Oh, she's also my fifth wife, just in case you were wondering. You would think having two wives around you at all times would be a wonderful and fulfilling experience. It's not. Out of all of them, I never expected that they would be the ones to stick with me. But, as my old man said, you go through life finding out who your friends aren't, and by them being the ones left standing, after the others die horribly at your own hands or the hands of your enemies because you killed them because they pissed you off in a bar fight, or they were killed by angry assassins, or some other such incident. This goes on for quite a while, incidentally, as he wasn't one for short pieces of advice. But it always made sense when you thought about it and condensed it all down into bite-sized chunks. Basically, you never know who will end up being your bestest buds in the whole wide universe until the shit has hit the fan and they are left standing. And these guys were the only ones left standing. It was around this time that I met my arch nemesis, my bane, my burden to bear, my second wife. She is the only one of my wives I truly fear, and the only one who has come close to actually killing me. Several times. In one night, at one point. We met after me and the Outersphere 7, or Oz for short, had liberated, a town from the White Petal Corps. We were happily toasting to our newfound fortune at friends to whom we provided most of the loot to. Basically, we were pissed and easy targets. Derv was the only one of us not in full merriment, and glad of it I am to this day, and was cleaning one of his many rifles when a commando unit led by my wife-to-be turned up and started to kick the new local's ass. I tried for my gun, but the bitch, most beautiful woman in the universe, caught me fair and square, and with my trousers down around my ankles while waist deep in a wench. Before I could get into cover, she had me in cuffs and I was being marched to her shuttle. It was then that Derv decided it was about time he demonstrated what made him the best shot in the outer sphere and shot the chain off my handcuffs, preceded by the same bullet dropping 22 of her, Sybil, in case you're wondering, best guys, and forcing both me and Sybil into cover. I say forced me into cover as well, but truth be told, I was still stinking drunk and just followed the immense cleavage and tight-fitting uniform Sybil had on at the time, much to Derv's annoyance. It was in this cover that me and Sybil got better acquainted. Basically, I kept hitting on her and radioed to the others to frame her for my escape and got another hunter-killer squad sent after her, and so eventually she relented and decided to join up with us for a while, begrudgingly, I might add. It wasn't until she started seeing what the local folks were actually going through that she started to be more than just a pain in my ass. It was also then that she fell head over heels in love with me and tried to kill me a few times. She's like that. If she likes you, she tries to kill you. If you survive, you are worthy of her attention. I started seeing the benefits of having a psychopath for a wife too. As many assassins learned the hard way that Sybil is quite possibly the toughest woman alive. She would make Valkyries turn and run screaming for their lives. She is deadly with almost anything she can get her hands on. You know, she once killed an assassin by beating him to death with her breakfast. I know it doesn't sound that impressive. It's only when you realise that she was having porridge that the reality of the feat sets in. You ever seen a guy killed by grievous bodily porridge injuries? It's not pleasant, but very funny looking. Anyway, that was when she started telling us about the political transports. We hit this one ship. Big motherfucker it was. We boarded, killed off any resistance that happened to stick its head out, and got all of the passengers into the main hall of the ship. It was full from one side to the other with all sorts of politicians and dignitaries. You know how many politicians actually make a difference? About 1% of them. The rest of them are about as useful as waterproof tea bags. Or worse, like tea bags with shit instead of tea in them. Besides, the 1% usually get assassinated, so you never actually see the 1% unless you're extremely lucky. Or the assassin sent to kill them, in which case you're a douche. Fancy making a living killing folks for cash. Actually, never mind, I said that. These were the creme de la creme of shitbags. They were all on some fancy tour of the Outersphere to see how well their policies were working. That is to say, not at fucking all. These were the bastards that decided it was a good idea to cut the funding to the medical centres, the schools, the public parks, and the security forces out here. The only thing the resistance was grateful for. And so I was none too fussed as to what happened to them. It was then this poky little fellow with white hair, orange skin, and far too expensive a suit for a politician swaggers up and starts spouting the common, "Do you know who I am?" and the usual, "Do you know who you are messing with?" type of grandstanding these shits love so much. He was all puffed up and trying to seem statesmanlike, and had some skinny bimbo hanging from his arm. She was as thin as a rake, but had a totally real set of huge breasts on her that made her look like an upside-down dickened set of balls. I looked him in the eye and said, "Can I ask you some questions?" He said, "Okay, if you must." I said, "Do you see the robotic leg?" He said, Sure, I see your robotic leg." I said, "You see the robotic arm?" He said, Yeah, I see you have a robotic arm." I said, "You see the robotic eye?" He looked for a moment and replied, "Some top quality work you have there." I think that's what he said. I wasn't really paying much attention to him. I was looking at the bimbo on his arm thinking, I would break you. Anyway, I said, "Thanks. Now for a few more questions for your lordship, if I may." He nodded, smiling, not catching the obvious tone of sarcasm in my voice. I said, "You see this really big gun I'm carrying?" He nodded, still not grasping the severity of the situation. I said, "You see the big pile of bodies where your guards and troops were standing a moment ago?" He looked, following my finger, then nodded before looking back almost incredulously, not grasping the nature of the exchange going on. I said, "Do you see these scary-looking folks I have behind me who haven't even a scratch on them?" He nodded again, beginning to fathom the shitstorm he had just walked himself into. I said, "And finally, how many fucks do you think I give about who you are?" He thought for a moment. You could see the wheels and gears in his head spinning as the realization settled in. He gulped and said, "None?" A look of desperation came over him at this. So I shot him in the face, leaving a smouldering mess where his head used to be. The walking upside-down bimbo penis he was with fell to the floor crying at this point, so I shot her too. I can't stand someone crying over an arsehole. I can't stand fake bimbos that look like I would break them crying over an arsehole even more. The next fella who walked up was a slimy-looking shit, pointy nose and chin, and the sort of demeanour that demanded being punched in the dick. He had on an equally expensive suit and looked like he was used to kissing arse and lording it over those less fortunate than himself. He came up smiling some fake shitbag of a smile and said in a creepy kind of way, "Hi, my name is Tony. May I say that you look like a man of exceptional taste? Could I interest you in perhaps letting me off this ship for a large sum of cash?" I smiled back and said, "Sure thing." He handed me a briefcase he had with him. It was full of gold, jewels, and what looked like 1,000,000 credits in 100-credit notes. I thanked him kindly, walked him to the nearest airlock, patting him on the back and saying, "You certainly understand the situation you find yourself in much better than the other fella. Toady, wasn't it?" He smiled and tried to correct me while not really looking where he was going. But before he finished, I pushed him into the airlock and then closed the door to him. You should have seen his little face light up as he realised there was no ship on the other side. He turned around and tried banging on the door saying, "That's not what I'm here!" Not sure what he said after that as I pressed the open airlock doors button and watched and waved as he went whooshing out into space. If you're ever in the position to bribe someone, make sure that you are perfectly clear about what you are bribing them for. I guess he learnt that lesson too late. They never did find his body. I like to think he's up there somewhere, floating about, with that look of realisation and terror, permanently frozen onto his beady, pointy face. The rest of the group kind of started looking from person to person, then back to us, not really sure what the protocol was in this instance. This is where I would have thought that they would have started at least fighting to get free. But you would be amazed how little backbone most politicians actually have. I decided I'd given up on the idea of using them as hostages for any kind of reparations or concessions towards the rebels, and decided that I would simply smile, wave, then open fire. It was like shooting fish in a barrel, except these people had less backbone and less brains. We took what we wanted from the ship and then blew the ship too. Made the central news, that did. They blamed an engine malfunction. We knew we could get away with anything from that point onwards. We started getting much bolder in our raids as well. Sybil would use her contacts to find us a valuable target, and we would drop it off the radar, so to speak. Sybil wanted to make an example out of everyone we came across that was running Central Colours. It got to the point that again we were wanted by everyone from the White Petal Corps to the central government to even the military breathing down our necks. Sybil got very crafty as she got more open in her conflict with the various factions. It wasn't soon before she wanted to run one of the resistance cells that had taken over one of the many moons and start making more of a difference. Still see her from time to time. I mean, we're still married. But it's usually bad news when I do. In fact, it's always bad news when she contacts us. I don't think she's forgiven me for not joining her, despite her saying at the time, "Don't you dare think of following me. You're too much trouble," which I later found out was code for "Don't you dare think of trying to be the boss of me, but you'd better come and join up or else." I only found this out after I accidentally listened into a conversation between 6 of my wives during a party for my youngest. They thought I was asleep and started comparing notes. Not all of it was glowing, so I'll leave it off my resume for now. Come to think of it, it was Sybil that got me into this current pickle I'm in. She called up and told me to be here, and here I am staring 300 dreadnoughts in the face, and all we have is this beat-up old cruiser. Anyway, where was I before slipping back into the certain death that is at hand? Oh yes, I was about to tell you about the planet we stole. Yes, planet. Yes, stole. It all started as a dare from my 6th wife, Antoinette, or Anne as I call her. She hates being called Anne. We had been married for about 6 weeks. It was a torrid affair. We had only met 6 weeks before. Everything went so fast back then. You met a pretty girl, she liked the size of your guns, and you married and had a few sprogs. I have 46 children currently that I know of anyway. Each and every one of them is a chip off the old block. As in, they're all wanted criminals, rogues and revolutionaries. Except Charlie. She's in the Peacekeepers. Not too far off the others, except that she runs the Peacekeepers, actually. Kind of a sore point at family gatherings. You can imagine what it's like when she tries to arrest half of your family every time we have a big get-together. And I always get blamed for inviting her. What can I say? I like the sparks. And it keeps the others on their toes. Anyway, Anne bet me that I couldn't steal the planet. I initially thought she was joking, but it turns out that she's mad despotic and wanted a whole planet to rule over. So I did what any self-respecting husband does. I got her a planet. Not some small moon, an actual planet. I did it by heading to the centre's military dry dock and liberating one of their Star Killer class cruisers. The one I'm currently about to die on, by the way. It's called a Star Killer class cruiser because, well, it kills stars. The military are not very imaginative when it comes to class nomenclature. They tend to find it easier to see if they are screwed or not when they see a rival ship. Let's see, there's the Runner class for running about, the Jump class, as in it can do jumps, Dreadnought, big, really big, like where the hell did space suddenly go kind of big, Star Killer, and Bombard class. And those are just the big ships. Then there's a whole array of smaller classes that do different things, like fighters, bombers, transports, and landers. As I say, not very imaginative. Not like the White Petals and their 100,000 Cuts class fighters, or their Hidden Blade Loud Snake class cruisers. They kind of take the piss, actually. By the time they've described the enemy numbers to their commander, it sounds like some weird haiku anthology. Yes, I know what one is. I swear they invented the super long-range scanners just so they could have time to say what was coming. Their names for guns are just as bad. Most people just settle for pass me the shotgun. They would rather say pass me the tread softly with a big stick and slicing jaws gun, or TSWABSASJ gun. Imagine an entire elite military unit that has to learn to speak in weird acronyms or poems before actually getting anything done. I suppose it's better than the order's nomenclature of big shooty stick. Anyway, we got this cruiser. Relatively easy, I might add. Apparently no one has had the balls to steal one from dry dock before. We flew it to the nearest asteroid belt while Viola got the ship drive online. She also hooked up the main cannon to a series of gas canisters and electrodes, so it looked like the main cannon was charging up. It wasn't, but it sure did make the remaining security forces jump when their ship that they thought was basically a shell started charging its main cannons. They were still kissing their asses goodbye when we were out of the system and went on our way to the Outersphere. The news reported that as a decommissioning of one of their ships going to plan. We only found out when we got to the Outersphere that one of the reasons it was in dry dock was that its reverse thrusters were a little temperamental, as in missing. This led to several misunderstandings at the first 3 docks we tried to land at. Viola managed to get the front-facing cannons into makeshift thrusters by pumping oxygen and hydrogen and igniting the whole thing while in spacesuit just before we hit the last of the 4 pads at the rebel base of S.H.I.E.L.D. They weren't as impressed with our acquisition as we were, or rather, they weren't as impressed with how little systems were actually still there. Thankfully, the main cannon was actually working once you plugged it back in. This took us about 3 weeks of pissing about to discover, by the way, not one of Viola's best moments. She had been racking her head for 3 weeks solidly when I was trying to get one of the blenders working in the kitchen, and plugged it in, and it turned out to be the main cannon. Shame we found out where we were, really. S.H.I.E.L.D. was a lovely base of operations. Now it's a lovely gas cloud. We don't speak much of this time. Anyway, once it was up and running, we made our way to the nearest inhabited planet, still under the central government's control. A lovely place called Paradise. As big a misnomer as that usually was, this was actually pretty nice. It was a tourist attraction at the time, and you would be amazed at how easily the local government handed over complete control of the system's defences when we destroyed their third sun. You'd also be amazed at how much bad press we got over that too. Anyway, I renamed the planet A Gift for Anne and picked her up while Violence had fun with the orbital satellites and quashed the local military resistance. The central government sent a small contingent of military ships to persuade us to release the planet, but it turns out that we had the only Starkiller class cruiser left in the Central's fleet, as they surrendered when we flashed our big gun at them. So that's how we ended up with a small fleet of ships at our disposal as well. The rebels forgave the slight shield incident when we suggested that they might like to captain the 13 or so ships we'd just liberated. This was when the central government decided to pull most of their military back to home space to defend against other acts of cowardice and brutality that we were apparently guilty of. I don't know, you destroy a couple of systems to see how something works, and suddenly you're a genocidal maniac bent on galactic domination. They were just jealous that we had fixed the ship that they were scrapping. It could have also been the experimental shield system that they had installed in the ship before we stole it, or the experimental drive, or the slightly cutting-edge and one-of-a-kind missile system that could grab asteroids and use them as larger munitions by charging the asteroids with dark energy before unleashing one of the most devastating barrages of hellfire the universe had ever seen. They may have also been none too fussed by the fact that no one was supposed to know they had this technology, especially as it was them who had managed to make it illegal in the first place. Oh, and there was also the heavily modified stealth drive that Viola had stolen from one of the runners on the way through the dry dock on our way to the super-secretive Starkiller that the central government swore they weren't developing. If you're going to create a super-secret weapon of mass destruction capable of taking on ships 100 times their size, it would be better if you didn't leave it unattended at a dry dock. Even if that is a pretty good place to hide super secretive tech, as no one in their right mind tries to steal broken ships. Unless they are mad, crazed, genocidal maniacs bent on galactic domination, apparently. It was at this time that most of the news broadcasts started calling me the Warlord. I kind of liked it. It was certainly better than Cedric Spencer O'Beard, which, if you ever mention to anyone, assuming that I don't die here shortly, I will hunt you down and burn your genitals over an open fire. They started saying I was responsible for everything from The Big Bang Part 2 to raids on central ships, to seal decline in polar regions throughout the outer sphere, to the steady decline in scientific research due to the galactic brain drain that started when intergalactic travel became cheap enough for settlers to start spreading out across the universe. None of it was true. Well, maybe not all of it was propaganda, but most of it was all lies. I mean, what reason could I have for hunting seals throughout the galaxy? I don't think I've ever seen one, let alone shot one, and I remember everything I have shot at. Well, nearly everything. Some things I shot without really looking. No one still knows whether it was me that shot the famous outlaw Dread Tits, or whether it was just a rebound shot from one of the other peacekeepers, though the big burned hole where Miss Dread Tits was standing kind of suggests it was me. Anyway, we gave Anne the planet and started guarding the ferries to and from the planet while she got settled in. She declared independence from the central government the next day. Within a week, she had the place running like clockwork. When I said she was mad despotic, I meant it. She started working on building an army that would help her overthrow 6 more planets within a day's jump of A Gift for Anne. She still hasn't renamed the planet, by the way. It's on all of the star charts too. Sybil got kind of jealous of the attention I was giving Anne, so I had to get her a couple of planets too, which I named Sybil 1 through to Sybil 6. She did change the names of those planets, though. They're now called my husband's a massive arse and exclamation mark. You try telling someone you're heading to a planet called exclamation mark. And yes, that's also in the star charts, all nicely grouped together and visible for anyone who chooses to look. I'm just glad I didn't get her a couple more. She could have been even more creative. Plus, thankfully, the planet Shit for Brains was already taken. Apparently, it was a translation error that just never got fixed. Anyway, the nickname Warlord kind of stuck with me. It was funny. Most ships just had to hear the name and they would surrender, with the occasional idiot willing to try and claim, "I killed the Warlord," to which they always ended up having, "I was killed by the Warlord," on their tombstones. It's funny what some will do for fame. What was I telling you about? Oh yes, impending doom. Well, here I am, 300 dreadnoughts staring at us, and all we have is this small cruiser. We might be able to kill 3 or 4 of them, but our shields won't last. I guess I really should have read the attached message with the coordinates that Sybil sent over. I really will never learn. The next book in the Outersphere Warlord monologue series is called 5,000 Degrees. If you're going to fight, fight for honor. Fight for justice. Fight for those too weak to fight for themselves. Fight for what is right. Fight for everyone who stands behind and with you. Unless you fight for money, then fight dirty. This is what my mother always told me when I came home. She was the only person I ever knew who was proud of me for anything I did. Literally, it didn't matter if I came back and told her I had just murdered an entire planet load of Marines while they slept. She would always see the bright side. On that particular occasion, she congratulated me and told me how proud she was that her son had such good tactical smarts like your dad. She even congratulated me for going into the Peacekeepers, although she couldn't actually come up with a good reason for it at the time. She actually kind of fluffed over the fact that I was with them, to be honest. She did make a big deal about how nice the uniform was, but a much bigger deal about the big box of donuts I brought back. She was always proud of me, no matter what I did, especially if I brought donuts. I remember coming home from picking a fight with the school bully because he had beaten one of the smaller kids to a bloody pulp. He kicked my ass from one end of the settlement to the other, right up to the point that we reached the port, and then he pushed me into the harbour. I swam there, covered in seaweed, shit, and refuse, as planned all along. I was a cunning little bastard even then. I started throwing shit at him till he jumped in to beat me some more. As soon as he did, I had won. He couldn't swim but was too stupid to remember. I got my first taste of blood that day. I beat him as he desperately tried to get out and kept beating him till he finally sank below the surface. I will never forget the look of utter defeat on his face as he hung in my grasp as I dragged him back to shore. My mother never said anything about the smell or the bloodstains. All she would say that she was proud of her hero son what saved that poor kid's life. That was the first time Benny really looked up to me as well. He was the young kid that got bullied that day. He never really fully recovered from the beating. As I may have told you before, he's about as intelligent as he is small. That is, he's huge, hulking, and dumber than 2 bald men fighting over a comb while sitting on a nuke falling through the clouds towards its intended target. He grew up fast though, Benny. He spent less and less time at school and more time at the local gyms, docks, or anywhere he could get a job lifting heavy objects or punching things, to the point that he got dropped from 4th grade for failing to spell them 13 times in a row. Although the hospitalizing of the teacher who called him stupid may have also had something to do with it. At that time, he was pushing weights that made professional lifters at the gym cringe and cower just at the thought of. He grew up fast too. He was 6 feet by the time he was 8 years old and 7 feet by the time his balls dropped. He quickly became my heavy muscle when fights broke out, and I quickly became his brains whenever he needed me to solve a complex problem, like why he couldn't get his door open after spending 3 hours pushing on it, and I simply showed him that it just needed to be pulled. He still asks me for help with that particular little brain teaser. He didn't initially join the phalanx with me as he was representing the local gym at the time in a weightlifting competition. Or, I should say, lifting the competition over his head before storming off with several of the female competitors under his arms. He was under a lot of stress, truth be told, that and suffering from raging hormones, probably induced by the small pharmacy he'd eaten the day before. Anyway, why do I bring this up? Well, it's because my mother dearest called a few days back and asked us to come help out as some centre douches were cracking down on the locals and causing a right ruckus, and it's interfering with our local poker night. So after Viola fixed the shields and got the main gun working again after the 300 Faces of Death incident, which we survived, by the way, only just, but we did, we set off home. I hadn't been home since before I left the Peacekeepers, mainly as I wasn't allowed within 30 parsecs of the planet, but since I'm technically in charge of the Outersphere now, I may as well drop some of the charges against me. I mean, if you can't drop charges against yourself and your friends when you become the leader of a disparate and broken coalition of desperate and broken people, what's the right point? Am I right? Anyway, after kicking one of the centre's prince's royal asses out of the area, along with 20,000 of the centre's finest, we had them on the run, and everything was fine, right up to the point that the engines blew and started us plummeting towards the atmosphere at speeds that make ships such as ours turn into candles in furnaces. That is, all melty-like. So where was I? Oh yes, I had joined the phalanx and survived the initiation. Then I told you about the promotion opportunity, but I never told you about the time we invaded the White Petal Corps, then home. The reason this comes to mind was it was a similar situation in that we were about to die a hot and melty death. You see, someone in the White Petal Corps had had the bright idea to develop a new heat round that could burn through anything it touched, and the Order wanted it for themselves. Those of you with good memories and deep enough wallets and questionable intellect to have bought the Brooks prequel will remember I use something similar in my current guns. Same tech, in fact. This was the prototype. So there we were, all sitting in our phalanx dropships, when the word came down that we would be accompanied by the Valkyrie fleet from the Western Alliance. The Valkyries were galactic bigwigs with a reputation of getting shit done that almost equalled the Oz. The first of the girls aboard our dropship was Callie. Yes, that Callie. This is how I met her. And no, we didn't hook up just yet. Remember, I was still all puffed up about being a phalanx, so I wasn't looking to sow seeds at this point in my life. Plus, I was still terrified to talk to girls. I know, hard to believe that I ever had any trouble speaking to women, but there you have it. We all come from somewhere. Anyway, me and Benny were in the same squad at this point, and Callie was drafted into our squad as a liaison, a fancy term for person used to keep our squad from fucking things up too much. She was just as dangerous then as she is now, only probably more responsible. We soon changed that. We were thundering our way across White Petal Corp space in our stealth dropships, all ready to drop out of stealth and plummet to the planet's surface and then kill anything and everything in our path to the research facility, when Callie suggested that maybe we would be better suited to a tactical insertion, just the four of us. Just in case you're wondering, the fourth was Derv, but he's such a dull person to talk about, I will talk about him as little as possible, mainly because he never said anything of note the whole time we were there, though he certainly saved our asses on more than one occasion. Anyway, after some discussion, which ended in a stalemate, and both me and Callie having black eyes and me having bruised chins, we decided that it would be better for interorganisational diplomacy that we should do things Callie's way. Basically, she blabbed to the higher-ups that we were being mean. So we got put in this small, tight, drop shit of a ship and plopped at the far side of the planet to where we needed to be. Why we were dropped so far from the intended target is still beyond me, but it ended up being a good thing, as it gave us far more time to get used to how white petal folks actually did things. I think I may have told you about their naming convention for things. Well, I'm going to again. They take an inordinate amount of time to actually say much at all. So most of them spend days on end, never talking about anything, or weeks just ordering breakfast. We were dropped off outside of a religious conclave full of nuns, and had I been like I am today, that would have been a story in and of itself. But as it was, we actually avoided it. Probably a good thing too. I'm pretty sure I would be old and grey before I managed to woo one of those nuns, what with describing my many talents in a white petal manner. Plus, these weren't the naughty, sexy kind of nuns that had tight-fitting habits that were cropped at the knee and looked like the goddess Freya had been cloned, and the clones had all taken up residence in a nunnery, all waiting for their heroic and sexy warlord to come and whisk them away from their lives of celibacy to a world of dirty and erotic bedtime naughtiness, all by an open fire. No. Instead, these were the kind of nuns that make priests behave themselves and school children fear them for the rest of your lives. You know, the ones that if you picked up and swung at a tree, the tree would get up and run away. Anyway, we started to make our way into a nearby forest to lose the tracking units that had been dispatched to our location once our drop shit of a ship lit up on all their long-range scanners as it gracefully and gently crashed headfirst into a swamp. I suppose looking back on it, that may have been a good thing, as the White Petal Corp trackers were convinced that it was just a meteor that they called off the search after a week. This may sound like a long time, but that's just how long it took them to say, "It's not here. I don't know what happened to it, boss." Or that's what I imagine they were trying to do all that time anyway. So there we were, on a strange planet, full of people who were all trained killers, and took 13 minutes in the morning to say, "Hello." Callie set about immediately dictating what we should and shouldn't do. And I immediately set about ignoring her and doing things my own way. Yes, her approach was probably more controlled and appropriate, but hers would have also taken months to complete. It's amazing how much she's changed over the years, thinking back on it. She used to be so controlled and strict. Now she just blows shit up for the fun of it. Strange what life does to people. Anyway, my plan was simple. We would hitchhike to the nearest airfield and steal a swings amongst the stars like a shining swallow-tailed flying fish, or light aircraft as I call it. Then fly the thing to the city next to the research station, spend a few days having R&R, right before actually storming the research station and then making a mad rush for the hidden jump ship that was carefully being readied by order operatives as we spoke. It was a sound plan, except for one small oversight. The White Petal Corps had not only discovered the order operatives a few hours after we landed, but had also banned all flights on or around facility planets during the final stages of research. So when we got to the nearest airfield, there wasn't a single plane taking off or flying. This made the stealthy option of flying in under the radar a little academic, as anyone with a set of eyes would have seen us coming from a mile away. Although, thinking back on it, they wouldn't have been able to describe what they saw quick enough for us to be in any danger. So we stole and armoured like a praying mantis perching upon the back of a giant turtle and ready to strike at its, you know what? It was an armoured personnel carrier. I'm not going to give you its full name as I don't have the patience, memory, nor spare space on my storage disk for the name. Suffice to say that the acronym is 52 letters long, and even that is too bloody long to say, so APC will have to do. Anyway, we stole the surprisingly comfortable APC and started making our way cross-country and under the radar. This was where Callie started to get the jitters for things that go boom. You see, we had stolen an APC with a heavy grenade launcher attached to the top. And since Carly was the only one who was small enough to fit into the seat, and because it was a separate cabin and we were more than a little annoyed with her incessant complaints of intergalactic treaty this and war crime that she got to sit in the gunner seat. It all went sideways when we were approaching a local town looking to get some fuel for the gas-guzzling but incredibly comfortable APC when I shouted back to Callie to wake up and keep her head on swivel. This caused her to jump a little and accidentally let off a shot from the grenade launcher. This would have been fine, except we were passing an oil refinery at the time that was, unfortunately, next to an ammo dump, a fireworks factory, and several fuel storage depots too. Things got a little heated at that point. The fireball could be seen for 100 miles in either direction and actually caused damage to several satellites that were orbiting just above the epicenter. It was at this point that all idea of stealth would normally have gone to shit. But apparently, the police investigating the fire spent so long calling it in and getting more firefighters on the scene that the whole place was a crispy, black, smouldering hole, and no evidence could be found as to what caused it. This would normally have been considered a serious turn of good luck for us. But Callie had tasted the forbidden fruit, and nothing anyone said could convince her to change her mind. Plus, none of us could get a word in edgeways with her constant laughing and giggle fits. Anyway, she seemed to be having fun, so we left her to it. Plus, none of us could actually get her out of the gunner's cabin as it was too small for any of us to actually get a hold of her. The news service was the first to notice the pattern that was being drawn across the landscape with explosions and fires randomly starting up and taking over entire towns. They noted how they all seemed to originate by the site of the first accident and travelled at approximately the approximate speed of 50 miles an hour, the top speed of the APC, and that maybe people should evacuate along the route as there was clearly a gas main that was running along there that was connected to the original explosion. This prompted the research facility to be abandoned by the time we got to it, which was handy, and Callie claims to this date to have been her plan all along, which I doubt, as all you could hear from in back was various forms of boom! Die, bitches! Why won't you fucking die? Oh, you already did. And my favourite, what do you mean I'm out of ammo? It's an energy-based grenade launcher. As long as we have gas, I have boom time! Followed by, silly me, the launcher overheated. I can fix that. This was followed by a pit stop at a local hardware store where Callie showed us one of her many other talents, that is, cobbling shit together to make for more explosions. She also found that you could take the safety off the launcher so that it didn't stop firing when it overheated, but that if you carried on, the barrel would melt, so she changed the barrel for a more heat-resistant version, so on and so on. To be honest, she kind of came up with some serious improvements to the design of the launcher. It was just a shame that she left it planetside when we had to get out. Those design changes have been implemented across the board with all military grenade launchers now, and everyone keeps claiming that they did it first, when in fact it was little Callie. She could have been a multi-billionaire by now with the copyright. Well, she couldn't. She'd have still been shooting things with a grenade launcher today if we hadn't accidentally had to steal a ship that was too small to fit the APC in. She's still sore about that. Still, it brought us all a bit of cheer and a boring adventure. To be honest, she really gelled us together as a group as well, don't tell her. But she's actually one of the reasons I wanted to start our own military mercenary group in the first place. We never really got much of a chance to work with the Valkyries after that incident, especially since she defected and joined the Phalanx about a week later, said she had differences of opinion with her superiors about the use of lethal force on the firing range, the bunkhouse, the dining hall, and during her disciplinary hearings. Basically, she was perfect for the Phalanx at the time and quickly became one of our most valued squad mates, even if we never got invited to stealth missions ever again. Oh, there was a point when leaving the planet that we were surrounded, and if it hadn't been for Derv's first shot hitting the first 13 guys between the eyes, we may have had a problem. But it doesn't seem that impressive looking back on it. That's why I almost forgot about it. That, and I hate mentioning Derv at all. You can almost feel the fun being sucked out of the atmosphere when he starts talking. Don't get me wrong, I wouldn't want anyone else watching my back. But I certainly wouldn't want to be in earshot of him, or sight of him, or have him in the same room as me. Come to think of it, it's only the fact that he's an ungodly shot that I haven't shot him yet. You know, he once managed to close an all-night burlesque show just by asking for a drink at the bar. I've never seen so many people lose interest in tits and ass quicker in my entire life, and I once saw Benny naked. Look, it's not that he's depressed or that he looks bad. Far from it. He has his own line of very popular hair products, named after him back in the centre, after all. No, it's just that he's so bloody boring. I mean, watching paint dry in slow motion while it's underwater without lights and listening to 23rd century pop, kind of boring. You know, enough to make you want to pull the airlocks open and suffocate yourself to death, kind of boring. He has such a vacuous personality that I swear I even lost the interest in finishing what I was going to say. I just... Anyway, that melty death I was telling you was going to thankfully happen shortly reminded me of the time the Phalanx had a beach getaway. I say beach getaway. We attacked a planet that was literally nothing but endless blue sea and beaches, and people like Derv surfing and letting their hair look like some kind of weird commercial for Derv hair care products. One shot is all you need. Sorry about that. He roped me into a commercial once, and I get a percentage of the proceeds consequently. One of the generals wanted to have a seaside residence, and someone told him that the Eastern Eagle Cooperative had a planet that had a perfect spot for one. So the whole of the Phalanx was mobilized and sent to invade this little backwater of a planet and claim it for the Order. It was just a shame that it also happened to be the EEC's officer getaway weekend when we arrived. We ended up turning half of the planet to glass, and the other half into a still smoking crater. Well, not all of the planet was ruined. The general's house was finished on the only part that was still okay. He still lives there, actually. He doesn't mind the smell of sulphur in the morning. Tells everyone it smells like victory. I think it smells more like one of Benny's socks myself, but it made him happy. And we all got a serious pay rise after wiping out the EEC's entire upper echelons in one day. It probably didn't help them that they all came without weapons, but hey, a victory's a victory, right? It was on this barbecue on the beach that we met Sally, come to think of it. She was the head of one of the other Phalanx squads from out east and was well versed in anti-EEC tactics. That is, she had an awful lot of bounties out on her for war crimes against the EEC, most of which entailed skinning people alive and sending them alive in body bags filled with salt. She had quite the reputation, and the reputation never quite lived up to her. Anyway, she was drafted into our unit as most of her guys quit the week before, after the last time she'd gone on a rampage. I guess they thought that we could temper her rage somewhat. Instead of that, what happened was that they created one of the most deadly fighting units the Phalanx had ever seen. Our success rate is still the stuff of legends, and many pending war crimes tribunals, should any of us ever actually be captured. You know, I said I could get most of the charges against me and the guys dropped. There are limits to power, but not people's memory, or written record, or video footage, apparently. Or the fact that Sally may have used a few of the locals as her own personal Etch-a-Sketch. It also turned out that she's quite a whiz behind the wheel. We were on some downtime on one of the red sunlight district planets, you know, for the culture. We were enjoying this great show by a nice girl who ended up being my 8th wife a few years later, after a stint keeping my head down in her establishment. Anyway, ED had just finished her show and was just collecting her tips with her buttocks, while spinning upside down when a bunch of peacekeepers burst in to collect on the bounties of anyone who happened to be wanted at the time. Well, we made sure Edie finished her set properly, and gave her a bonus for professionalism for managing to keep smiling, even when one of the peacekeepers' hands landed squarely on her tits. Just his hand, mind you, the rest of him was being torn to pieces by Sally and Carly for interrupting their session of guess the stripper's natural hair colour before the knickers come off. Anyway, Edie finished her set, proceeded to wipe the guts from the feathers in her hair, then beat the shit out of the remaining 12 peacekeepers who had been brought in for backup, while me and Benny finished our drinks. Right before getting stuck into the 3 APCs that turned up after Edie made mincemeat of the poor bastard whose eye popped out and landed between her cleavage. Anyway, things were going swimmingly, and we were having a ball of a time smashing heads together and listening to Edie sing as she and Sally broke 3 guys' necks between their combined cleavage. And when the sky went dark and the Peacekeeper's supercruiser, the Deft Hand, turned up and started shouting all sorts of demands. Anyway, we jumped in the nearest vehicle and made a run for it. I mean, I'm all for impossible odds, but 6 against 60,000 in mech suits just wasn't a win-win situation for anyone but the peacekeepers, and no one likes a sore winner. Sally was the first into the vehicle, but Derv said something about women drivers and got a look that to this day makes even me want to hide and hope the storm will go away. Anyway, the others piled into the back, and Sally started the engine. And in a wall of tyre smoke, she took the fuck off like nothing I have ever seen. I swear she can make things go faster than they ought just by sheer willpower and ego alone. Having a drink.
You're drinking that tea.
That's not in the story. I'm just drinking a tea.
Ninja told you to.
Oh yeah, she told me to drink one, but I'm drinking my tea now.
Thank you, Ninja.
Thank you, Ninja. Much appreciate it. Anyway, the 60,000 green mech suit wearing namby-pamby peacekeepers, who would later be my esteemed colleagues, tried to surround us and stop us getting to our transport ship we had at the port. What followed was like something out of Transporter 315 Part 2. We went from screeching tyres to screeching passengers to screeching peacekeepers, as we must have made Mach 5 or 6 on 4 wheels while travelling sideways down a one-way street, the wrong way. And she managed to get the damn thing through rush hour traffic without so much as spilling the drink she still had in her hands. Derv has not once since questioned a woman's driving. So at least one of us grew that day. The rest of them lost at least 6 years of their lives in sheer terror, not at being captured, but at the prospect of being killed by either by Sally's insane ability to make a 16-wheeler go around corners that are tight even when walking, or the fact that when any one of them tried to get out and surrender, she threatened to drive back and start all over again. I think I was the only one enjoying the ride, and totally didn't make out with her 12 times, while she piloted the transport ship through a blockade of 42 supercruisers and 60 or so cruisers at speeds that most ships use for interstellar travel, let alone leaving port. Great times. Unlike today, where our engines are about on fire as our outer hull, and even Sally has put 2 hands on the controls. This is only the second time I've seen her do that in all the time I've known her. The other time was during a peacekeeper mission to the Northern People's Republic of Dor. A series of 5 planets and suns orbiting a rogue black hole while that was in its infancy. Words. Blah, blah, blah. We were sent in to sort out some internal power struggle that had led to 13 billion refugees and a space jam that covered 3 systems. Apparently, the supreme ultimate leader had died and left 2 children in line for the throne, namely Princess Kira and Princess Michelle. One was a moderate who wanted to bring the NPRD into the intergalactic fold, while the other was a crazy lunatic who wanted to push the galaxy into a conflict that would burn the light from every star system and leave only the NPRD left standing. Or so she said. We'd been brought in to oversee the rule of law and ensure that the internal method of deciding the lines of succession didn't spill out of control and into a 3-system-wide ethnic cleansing. It sounded much more magnanimous than it was. The peacekeepers actually had a base on one of the system's moons. An expensive base. A newly built a few months before base. finished just 2 days before the Supreme Ultimate Leader had passed away tragically in an accident involving his spacesuit and the black hole that he apparently had gotten too close to while in his bath. If you can work out why he was in a spacesuit in his bath and why his bath was situated too close to a black hole when it was planet-side, you have done better than 99% of the people who live in the NPRD, who still think the galaxy is flat and revolves around them. The Peacekeeper base had sent a distress call after Princess Michelle had decided that she wanted the new base of operations and liked the colour scheme the Peacekeepers had chosen, and we were sent in. This was one of the few occasions where Derv didn't go, as he was busy shooting a new hair commercial on the jungle planet of Trope, and consequently this is one of the few occasions where we had a damned fun time. Despite the abject misery and filth that the locals lived in, nothing could possibly depress us about the situation as we didn't have Derv with us. I'm pretty sure if we had been there, we would have all committed suicide. The general in charge of the Peacekeeper base, General Octavius, yes, that was his name. Yes, he was a pompous ass, called specifically for my unit as we had a reputation for getting shit done. He called us into his gold gilded office and had the four of me, Sally, Callie and Benny, standing to attention while some waif of a boy fed him grapes like he was the emperor of the universe. He was old and about as fat as he was tall, making him look like some weird crossbreed between a football and a raisin. He looked us over, smiled, revealing no teeth, and spluttered his orders to us. He said something like, "Don't kill too many locals. Don't make too many enemies. And most importantly, don't work with the resistance at all." So the first thing we did was make contact with the local resistance in order to get the skinny on what was going on and where, and who was behind it all. The resistance sent two of their most skilled operatives, Darren and Sarah O'Brien. Yes, this is where we met the terrible twins. I first laid eyes on my fifth wife when one of her battle bots was pinned on top of me with its chainsaw buzzing near my nose. She walked into the room like there was nothing going on and grabbed a wrench and started working on what to me looked like a pile of scrap metal, which later turned into an assault class rider with Gatling lasers and a missile launcher. She took one look at me and fell head over heels in love with me. Or at least, that's what I like to think. She actually said, "Hurry up and kill it before it gets up." She was always such a kidder. Anyway, after Darren came in and vouched for me and I let the BattleBot escape its certain demise, she started taking a shine to me. She hit me over the head with a wrench and warned me that if you have damaged the servos on Polly, I will replace them with ones keeping your leg working, you half-tin, half-tuna freak. We hit it off like a house on fire after that. The trouble started after we accidentally shot Princess Michelle when we went to try and peacekeep during a conference between the two siblings. This apparently set Princess Kira off and set the stage for the first of the many Peacekeeper wars. All I will say is that we had no intention of shooting her in the face, and we certainly weren't receiving a large pay packet from the Resistance at the time. Anyway, things were going really well at the conference, right up to the point that Princess Michelle demanded that the Peacekeepers disarm during the conference, and that outside interference would result in a fire and fury the likes of which the universe hasn't seen since the first Big Bang. It was then that someone, who looked a lot like me, had a gun misfire and caused Princess Michelle to lose her left eye and half her head. Princess Kira then went all biblical on us and tried to kill everyone in the room while her sister was rushed off to the nearest med bay. It's strange. The moderate sister ended up being just as crazy as the crazy sister. I guess blood really is thicker than water. Anyway, Princess Michelle survived, and the two sisters became the best of friends and put all differences aside. So we had done what we set out to do. Unite the NPRD, all under the banner of one crazy family, and start one of the most deadly conflicts in the history of the Northern Quadrants. I still get hate mail even today. I swear I just heard part of the outer hull pop off. Never mind. So where was I? Ah, yes. Darren and Sarah didn't initially join the Peacekeepers, mainly as there was an issue with outstanding warrants and war crimes tribunals to take care of, but no witnesses ever came forward, and all of the charges were dropped when one of the lead investigator's daughters disappeared for a few weeks right as the proceedings started. Now, I'm not suggesting that Darren had anything to do with her disappearance and subsequent reappearance a few weeks later, pregnant with his first child. But the two of them became very close during the investigations. I'm also not saying that she had anything to do with the strange illness that killed off only those people who had actually witnessed Darren murdering a village load of NPRD troops. But Celia did happen to be a top virologist studying the weaponization of certain deadly diseases. Darren and her got married a few weeks later, and we all went on a massive drinking binge that covered 300 different pubs over the space of 3 days. As I said at the time, they were the best of times, they were the worst of times. I read that somewhere once. Thank you for the follow. Thank you very much indeed for the follow. No, Darren and Sarah didn't join the Peacekeepers at first. In fact, we didn't see them again until a few years later when I was investigating a daring raid on a financial planet that had resulted in the loss of a lot of center resources. The gang I suspected of performing the heist somehow managed to get away. We never did find out who the ringleader was. All we know is that he had a mechanical left arm, leg, and eye, and he had some short stock of a woman with him that kept throwing grenades and sticking sticks of explosives around while singing. There was a tall goddess of a woman who was complaining about not being allowed to murder everything, and some tank of a guy who lifted the vault over his head and walked it to their waiting, totally stolen Peacekeeper dropship. Funny coincidence, that year's Peacekeeper Ball was one of the most decadent and expensive affair the Peacekeepers had ever seen. While I was investigating the possible links between the local taverns, I came across Darren and Sarah involved in a shootout with the local authorities that made the old Western classic John Wick series look kind of tame. It wasn't until I convinced the local authorities that Darren and Sarah were informants in my case, and that maybe they would survive to see another dawn, that they thought it was a good idea to let bygones be bygones and surrender the workshop where they had hid up in back to Darren and Sarah. I had to convince my higher-ups that this was a good thing and deputise Darren and Sarah to avoid a conflict of interest. It was shortly after this that they got their nicknames Violence and Violates. It had come to our attention that some higher-ups were questioning the statements that we had collected from the bank heist, and that there was a pirate group in the area that had gotten a name for itself for attacking and killing people. I mean, what kind of pirate group goes around stealing and killing stuff? Anyway, as a distraction, target of opportunity, we decided that me, Darren, and Sarah would infiltrate the pirate gang and arrest the whole lot of them once we got them all in one place. Darren decided that the best way to get himself into the pirate gang was to kill their main competition and bring their heads on a platter to the pirate leader, a fella by the name of Captain Hook. I'm not kidding, that was his actual name. First name Captain, last name Hook. Like, what other forms of employment was he ever going to get with a name like that? Seriously, what do parents think when they name their children? We headed to the nearest pirate bar, yes, they have bars, and started asking the locals who was Captain Hook's biggest enemy and where could we find them. Turns out that there's a big thing in pirate culture of not telling nose-pokey people much at all unless you are dangling from a 30-foot story building being held up by a robot with a razor-sharp grabbers. Sarah did tell me their technical name, but they look like grabbers, so they're grabbers. After the first few people ended up being puddles on the ground floor, mainly due to the fact that some pirates actually go for the wooden peg leg thing as a fashion statement, and peg legs tend not to be held on very well, much to my great amusement, we got some solid intel on who Captain Hook's nemesis was. His main nemesis turned out to be his wife, Mrs. Hook. Again, yes, that was her actual name. Who calls their child Mrs.? Then again, what kind of sick, twisted bastard names their child Cedric Spencer O'Beard? We headed for her base of operations, a shantytown clinging to a local asteroid belt, and Darren and Sarah went about earning their nicknames. I spent the time making sure no one was hiding in the local tavern and securing the armory as well, which just happened to have been located in a house of earthly delights. When Darren and Sarah had finished, there was a body count high enough to earn them a place on the Peacekeepers' payroll, and me another promotion for delegation. Then the messy business started with the procurement of the heads for the pirate gang. This, me and Darren left to Sarah to sort out. Turns out that when someone asks for the heads of their enemies served up on a silver platter, most people don't actually literally mean they want the heads of their enemies served up on a silver platter. Hey, pause. Captain Hook and his merry band of pirates really were not expecting to see their dinners so shortly after eating them, that's for sure. You would think a group of bloodthirsty pirates, known for their callous and deadly raids on civilian ships, the murder of a school load of kids, and the burning down of 3 medical stations would have more stomach for gruesome scenes. Apparently not. Either way, we were inducted into their ranks that night, and by morning the whole gang was arrested and grateful to be led away from the 3 psychopaths who had been torturing them, whoever they were. Once Darren and Sarah were given badges, and I got command over my own division, we started chasing after people we wanted to, and taking contracts for whomever we chose, or just making up contracts and trying to come up with reasons why they were wanted. The bosses were always amazed that we had a 100% procurement rate for outlaws, even if some of those outlaws turned out to be royalty. But hey, our job was to catch them, not to convict them after all, and as they say, let God sort out the details, or at least the leech lawyers. This was probably the most productive time the Peacekeepers had known, and more people were brought to justice than it ever had been in its entire history before we joined. We were able to catch people committing crimes that even the authorities were unaware of, mainly due to our connections with the criminal underworld, but also because we caught people committing crimes that they didn't even know they were committing. Considering who we were, corruption also reached an all-time low as well. Strangely, that happened after we found out that a corporation had somehow managed to get dirt on one of its presidents, one of the presidents that oversaw a section of the Outersphere called the Northern United States of Awesomeness. Yes, this was their name, and yes, they really were that full of themselves. The then president had decided that placing restrictions on information and freedom of expression and movement at the behest of his corporate masters, and while this wouldn't normally be a peacekeeper thing, we got wind of it and discovered through a complex and very long-winded, hence the hefty bill we charged the peacekeepers, investigation. We then assaulted the planet base he had constructed and arrested him and placed a much more moderate and friendly person in charge until democratic elections could be held. We then televised the punishment that was being doled out by Viola and broadcast to the entire Outersphere under the title of What Happens to Corrupt Officials. This is still one of the most upvoted videos of all time. We even have t-shirts on sale in the Oz shop that have the famous last words of "Please, not the peanut butter" printed on the back. It still amazes me how many corrupt individuals handed themselves over and ceased all operations after that video went viral. It also still amazes me that people can look at peanut butter, let alone eat it after that too. Violates also got the Best Smile During Something Awful award, which she keeps above her bed, and managed to secure a contract designing torture devices throughout the outer sphere and beyond. Some of her designs are being used in some of the most heinous regimes throughout the known universe, a fact that she has never let me forget when I complain about my computer terminal not working as well as it should. What is the melting point of high-carbon titanium alloy? And at what point should sprinklers cease to pump out steam into a room full of electronic devices? Okay, I definitely heard a pop on the outer hull that time. And why is Viola asking Callie to head to the armory? Anyway, talking of Callie heading to the armory, that gets me in mind of the time that we decided to invade the Center Home system in order to get some high-tech thingamawatsit that Viola wanted. Me, unfortunately Derv, Benny and Callie headed off in one of the cruisers we had requisitioned during one of our many liberation missions while we worked as a mercenary group. This particular model was a white petals, dragon lily effortlessly flies in a never-ending celestial eververse, or Defiance, as we'd shortened the name to, partly as we couldn't be bothered saying the full name all the time, and partly because it sounded way cooler. We had chosen a White Petal Corps cruiser for several reasons, mainly as it had the longest range scanners out of all of the ships at the time, but also because it had the best sound system. Say what you will about the WPC naming conventions, but they kit their ships out with some kick-ass audio equipment. So there we were, flying straight to the center's home planet of terror. Music blaring and desperately trying to ignore the fact that Derv was talking about some wax or other he had come across, when the long-range scanners lit up like an arcade that was haunted by a pinball fanatic. And we were quickly all jumped into action, and not all talking at the same time to shush Derv from talking anymore. It turns out that while the center home planet was still there, it was currently under attack, coincidentally, by the WPC, and for all intents purposes, we were the backup the WPC troops had been waiting for. This would normally have been a stroke of good luck. However, this meant that we were now stuck between a rock and a hard place. Either we helped the WPC out, or reveal the fact that we were currently aboard a stolen cruiser, while conversely having to invade the centre's most heavily fortified planet defense network on behalf of the WPC, or informing them that no, we weren't the WPC guys and that we just happened across this cruiser and just happened to appear at the exact same time that the WPC had sent out a request for reinforcements, and could they nicely not try and shoot us out of the system? Either way, we were headed for some very hot water. So we did what any self-respecting mercenary does. We flipped a coin. This, of course, happened to coincide with the gravity system failing aboard the ship, and so the coin landed sideways on, spinning. The only conclusion we could come to was that we were supposed to tell both sides to suck it and go in all guns blazing, which I think may have made Callie very happy as she calmly stepped away from the gravity controls and jumped a literal hoop. Benny then started jumping around like an idiot, totally unaware of what was actually happening, just because Callie was doing it, and Derv ran his hands through his hair. Meanwhile, I made mental calculations about the ordnance requirements, the ship's current weapon loadouts, and where the nearest escape pods were located, and how fast each person in the room could run, and decided it would be better if the others would calm the hell down and get to work. What followed next was one of those occasions where we were in the right place at the right time. While normally flying in all guns blazing would have had at least several of the two sides that were slogging it out in orbit turn and blow us out of the sky, the WPC seemed too focused on what they were doing to notice that one of their ships was attacking everything in sight. That, or they were just taking too long to tell their commanders what was happening, and so we were getting away with it. The Order defence ships also seemed none too fussed about the fact that the newly arrived WPC cruiser was shooting everyone and everything in sight, since they were too busy trying to deal with the already large number of WPC that were there in the first place. We only realised that neither side was particularly bothered with us after we'd already shot down one or two of the enemy ships, and decided to stop and try and make a break for the science station orbiting on the other side of the planet. I say we stopped when we realised this, but truth be told, we stopped because we'd run out of ammo, since the person in charge of loading the ship and supplies, loading the ship with supplies, had decided in their infinite wisdom that 20 tons of hair care products were more important than 20 tons of ammo clips for the ship's main cannons. Derv very nearly found his way out of an airlock at that point, but was saved by the fact that we were very much too focused on staying alive rather than pushing him out of said airlock. Besides, in all the confusion, none of us had remembered to turn the music off, and all Benny heard was "push Derv's hairlock," which caused Benny to give Derv his comb from in Derv's back pocket. To this day, Derv thinks Benny really cares about Derv looking great at all times, and Benny doesn't understand why I don't ask him to do anything more complicated than smash, kill, and carry. Callie, at this point, noticed that the science station that we were heading towards seemed to be in a panic at the sight of a WPC cruiser heading its way, as it started flashing the intergalactically accepted signal for "Please don't shoot us, we surrender," which was to turn all of its lights into the three colours of blue, white, and red. It's the space equivalent of waving a white flag and putting your arms up in the air. It's also known as doing a Francois. This was a serious stroke of luck for us at this point, as we hadn't actually thought about how we were going to get aboard the science station up until then. We proceeded to the dock at the space station and towards the arse end of their research and development wing, where we found Viola's Project X, which turned out to be a new type of frictionless servo motor that she wanted for her robots. After the initial size of, well, that was underwhelming, and Callie's, I was hoping for more explosions, to be honest, we grabbed the super secret, one-of-a-kind glorified hairdryer motor and started heading towards the dock again. But thankfully, for the interests of this particular story, the Order had sent a couple of elite cleaners to try and retake the station, and Callie had the bright idea of checking the armory. Hey Joe, I'm reading one of the stories I've written. It is the second book in the Outersphere Warlord monologue series, The 5,000 Degrees. The first part has already been read. The first book's already been read. And if you'd like to check it out on YouTube later on, you're more than welcome. But I am just drinking a cup of tea. Reading dries your throat out. So Callie had the bright idea of checking the armory. Along the way, we ended up fighting a running battle with the elites that reminded me of a scene from an old game called 343 Cortana's Big Day Out, as we had stealthy fucks dropping out of the woodwork trying to hit us with energy blades, little guys whose heads kept exploding when I shot them, and fired more bullets at one another than should be humanly possible to carry. Thankfully, the space station we were currently on was extremely well armoured inside and had a very lax cleaning strategy, as after every corridor we had fought our way down, there were some very handily left piles of ammunition for us to reload our weapons. I even found a resupply cabinet that had my exact ammunition type already loaded into frighteningly similar hand cannons to my own. One added to the comparison between this situation and the aforementioned game was the fact that Callie had somehow managed to get the station to play rousing orchestral pieces through the PA system that seemed to be going along with the action around us. The fact that I kept shouting, "Headshot!" every time I shot one of the bad guys, and Benny would subsequently cheer, was eerily similar too. It would have been too much if one of us had taken a wrong turn and found a skull just lying on the ground. I guess that's where the similarities ended, as I'm pretty sure if we had died, we would not have respawned at the previous armed checkpoint. though we did score each other on gruesomeness of kills. Benny kind of won that one, though. He placed one of the elites between his butt cheeks and squeezed, while farting in the poor guy's face. Poor bastard wished he had been shot by explosive rounds that burn like a sun. He even tried to mumble something along the lines of, "Shoot me in the face, not in the chest, not in the neck, shoot me in the face. I want to die. No, go. No, please, God, shoot me in the face." I have never heard a trained elite military unit cry with such passion as when they saw their buddy's head explode. Even me and Callie were kind of glad he finally died. It was truly cruel on Benny's part. The worst thing was how happy Benny seemed after he had done it. He was jumping about and giggling with the guy's poor lifeless corpse dangling behind him like a floppy bloody dingleberry. Upon arriving at the armoury, we discovered several projects that may have actually been of more importance than our new hairdryer, even if Derv was totally enamoured by the thing. The first project we came across was an ammo generator for small cruiser ships, much like the one we had arrived in, which was good for Derv's long-term survival. And the second was a new type of suit that the Order had been co-developing with the Peacekeepers that would allow someone to stand on the outside of a ship while re-entering an atmosphere. I think I just worked out why Callie and Viola are headed to the armory. I also think I might have worked out why I thought I saw Benny outside the ship waving and smiling at me a moment ago. I thought it might have been the fire suppressant gases messing with my head again. Okay, I guess story time's over. I must check to see if they're about to do something reckless. And if they aren't, ask them if I could do something reckless, as that would make a great story for my next book. If we survive, that is. And if I can manage to not fall down this big gaping hole that just opened in front of me where the captain's chair used to be. Maybe we should have invested in a brand new ship's computer rather than buying one of those budget jobs by Dell. And that's the end of book 2. Thank you very much for tuning in. Thanks for dropping by. Thanks for listening to me rant and rave and shout all sorts of crazy things at you. Nisi said she did a terrible job as a moderator, but I don't think so because she kept chatting with people even though I couldn't. So I'm very much appreciative of Nidhi chatting with you all and keeping you all occupied while my madness carried on. Anyway, thank you for watching. You guys take care. You guys look after yourselves and stay safe. And as always, be good. And if you can't be good, well, don't give the Peacekeepers our name. Till then, peace. If you liked what you saw and you'd like to see more, feel free to hit that follow button. If you're watching this on YouTube, feel free to hit the subscribe button. If you're crazy and want to actually own the books yourselves, you can always check out Kindle.